I don't even know how to make this video, seriously. You know, when I posted the last one, I expected it to end up like the first video I posted. You know, I'd get a couple views and I'd forget about it, satisfied with getting all of the thoughts out of my system. But this kind of validation is making me reconsider just how much time I dedicate to content. That's not all it's doing, though. I'm worried that the eyes now on me might change my voice in these videos, so to speak. I wish you guys could see the other scripts, they're unfunny as hell. Why would a FNAF theory need to be funny, you may be asking yourselves? No clue, seriously. The last script for this video was bad. At any rate, I wanted to take a second today to clear some of the stuff up from my FNAF 1 through 4 video, as well as lay out a framework for this theory retrospective I'm working on. A Theoryspective, let's call it. I think I should start by explaining a bit why I choose to talk about the story using only evidence from the time that the games came out with the hindsight that we have now. I think it makes more sense to take you guys on a journey with me as these games came out, rather than flash back and forth like some kind of all-knowing FNAF expert. I'm not, and doing that would only confuse me, the person making these videos. This approach is the only way that I know how to talk about this franchise cohesively. We may not know what's going on right now, we may never know what's going on, but we can always look back and seek to understand the past. Doing so often helps us understand the current story. I think that's the most satisfying way to enjoy this franchise. Therefore, for these videos, I think the proper approach is to break the franchise up into eras and treat each era as their own self-contained story, getting progressively more complex as we go along. With that in mind, let's go ahead and name these eras so we have a framework to talk about them. First up, we've got the Cryptic era. This contains FNAF 1 through 4. I think the name is pretty self-explanatory. Scott was at his most vague and broad here. We had no specifics, no real characters, just a collection of roles and spooky phrases. Next up, we've got the Transition era. This covers FNAF World and the first Silver Eyes novel. Initially, I was going to split these up and put the book in the Cryptic era and FNAF World in the following chunk, but they don't really cleanly fit into either of them, so it makes more sense to me to consider them as one era together. This is sort of a cocoon stage for FNAF. We don't know what soupy weirdness is going on inside, but Scott's doing his best to try and tell us. Now we can get to the Afton era, encompassing Sister Location, the last two Silver Eyes novels, Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, the Security Logbook, and Ultimate Custom Night. These games and books really solidify modern interpretations of FNAF that were seeded in the tail end of the Cryptic era and in the Transition era. It also expands the series' narrative, sort of patching up the gaps in the Cryptic era as it concludes and expands the story. Next, we've got the Fazbear Frights era, covering FNAF VR, AR, and the Fazbear Frights books, but not Tales from the Pizzaplex. While you could link all the Steel Wool content as one era, I think these properties encapsulate another transitional period that should be treated separately, just like FNAF 4 and the first Silver Eyes novel. And lastly, as mentioned, we have the Pizzaplex era, which encompasses Tales from the Pizzaplex, Security Breach, Ruin, and Help Wanted 2. Now, the lines between these eras is somewhat vague, but I tried to justify myself as best as possible. At any rate, this is how I'll be breaking up the series when I choose to talk about its story. Just to recap my last video, we've already been through the Cryptic era. I suggest you go watch that video if you want all the proper evidence and context, but I'll summarize my rough timeline here. In 1983, a small child was killed by a Fredbear animatronic at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, when his brother and some of his fellow employees' bullying gets out of hand. He then goes on to possess the animatronic that bit him, Fredbear. Sometime later, a murder occurs during a child's birthday party outside the pizzeria. 5 more kids go missing. Footage shows a Spring Bonnie animatronic lead the children away, never to be seen again. Combine this with the increasingly gross animatronics, and the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza finally closes its doors. Only then to return with a sick new location with better animatronics in FNAF 2. And honestly, FNAF 2 deserves its own video because that game is dense, despite how little impact it's had on the timeline as a whole. Whatever you think caused this location to close, the dead children's incident, the bite of 87, or both, it doesn't really matter, at least not in the broader scheme of things. Then, years after FNAF 2, FNAF 1 happens, at a reopened Freddy Fazbear's, right? Maybe, but let's consider the very first phone call we ever get.
I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night. I actually worked in that office before you. I'm finishing up my last week now, as a matter of fact.
Phone Guy says he's recording them, though we never hear when. Who's to say how recent they are? In fact, I'd wager that this is why we hear the same voices across all the tapes, even in the older ones, like the vintage training tapes in FNAF 3. Sure, we know that the real-world excuse is just because Scott didn't have a voice acting budget, but maybe he saw that as a plot hole that needed patching and introduced the vintage tapes in FNAF 3 as a way to do so. Speaking of which, that game bookends this neat little timeline nicely. Someone faces off with Springtrap, and in an effort to end it, burns down the building. Now let's take a second to admire how coherent and uncomplicated this is, because, it doesn't stay that way. Now you may have noticed that I sort of retconned my last video here. In that video, I stated that the story of FNAF 1 through 4 was the story of Mike Schmidt, and that there are 2 purple guys, and just, it's all super unnecessary, I think. This theory stands on its own without adding that stuff in and needlessly complicating the 4 games, 1 story narrative. I really wanted to force the whole Mike is protag thing for no reason. I don't think Scott had that idea at the time. The cryptic era was all about roles and not named characters, so I think it makes way more sense to think of 4 games, 1 story as the story of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. It wasn't the story of 1 character, and it wouldn't be until the Afton era. Now, my next video is going to be about the transition era, so I wanted to take the rest of this video to go through some popular responses to my last one and really iron out all the wrinkles in my timeline, because I think you'll find that while there were a couple claims made in that video that can be disproven, my main claims, the crying child's brother working at Freddy's and the puppet not giving life to the 5th MCI victim, stand untouched. First up, the 4 kids that killed the crying child are the missing kids, and the purple guy killed them to get revenge for the death of the crying child. Well, I hate to break it to you, but we know that's not true in current day. We have names for all the dead kids now, and we know the person with the Foxy mask is Michael Afton, and the community pretty much agrees that the Bonnie Bully goes on to become Cassie's dad and the protagonist of Help Wanted 2. If I went into it all now, it'd derail the video, so I almost didn't respond to this one. I guess you'll just have to stay tuned and wait for me to get to the whole franchise. I'm not going to read this next one because it's super long, but here it is on screen. Basically, there's more evidence for Mike being the protagonist in the first 3 games that I didn't mention. And honestly, I think that's a decision Scott made later. I think he just enjoyed the idea of phantom animatronics from all of the previous locations at the time that he was making FNAF 3. Sort of a culmination of everything that came before it. When it comes to the reason the player comes back each night of the week, well, you can handwave that with any explanation. Money, the fact that each game only takes place over the course of a couple days. I just don't think Scott was thinking about it all that hard when he made those games. But honestly, it could go either way. I've changed positions on when Michael became the protagonist, but you don't have to. Go forth and create your own unique theories with the narrative lens that I've crafted for you. Like the last one, this one's too long, so here it is. Basically, this person thinks that 4 games, 1 story is Dream Theory. And look, if you think Dream Theory was a thing, I'm not going to argue with you. It has a lot of evidence to support it after all. But ask yourself this. Why did Scott take until the FNAF movie to acknowledge Dream Theory when the book released around the same time? What made him think Dream Theory was the move for this franchise? And why did he abandon it so quickly? I don't know, I feel like FNAF has never been a cliche franchise, and Dream Theory just seems so separate from anything that Scott ever wanted to tell us. Combine this with all the rebuttals for Dream Theory, and, well, it just doesn't hold up for me personally. Then, from this guy. Something that always confused me. If CC survived and lived for a while in the hospital, is he actually in Golden Freddy? Like, is he even possessing an animatronic? Technically, he didn't die in one, and as far as we know, he was never placed back in one. Maybe Rytos touched on something similar right before I uploaded my video, so I didn't have time to watch it and think on it. It's an interesting way of thinking, if nothing else. I'm just not a fan of the conclusions that Rytos derives from it. Besides, then what would FNAF 4 have been about? William didn't exist back then, so just a kid who gets bitten? Maybe the TV show is a rerun and the game takes place in 87, someone else brought that up after all, but then that puts it after the missing children's incident. And besides, Scott himself came out to try and correct the situation when MatPat put forth that theory. It just devalues the story a lot, honestly. Plus, there's all the 2 souls, 1 animatronic symbolism in Fazbear Frights. I don't know. I'm just not a huge fan of the ramifications. Then last, from Blitz's 3177, Scott added a Golden Freddy jump scare to FNAF 1's custom night if you put 1987 because there was a popular hoax when the game first came out that if you put 1987 as the difficulty, Golden Freddy would jump scare you. It most likely has no significance. Well, actually, it was because there were rumors of a secret ending. I don't know, I mean, maybe. Granted, this is the reason that Scott decided to add the jump scare to the game. I'm not contesting that, but he could have added, like, any jump scare, or hell, even just randomize a jump scare. It was his first game though, and as a game developer myself, I guess it makes sense that he would just use Golden Freddy for quick convenience, but I don't know. At the end of the day, they're not mutually exclusive ideas. Besides, the community made the association early on, and Scott was very aware of it. Otherwise, FNAF 4 wouldn't have had so much Fredbear and Bite symbolism, right? Like, there would be no other reason to link those two ideas. Okay, I think that takes care of all the big ones. There wasn't a ton I had to say in this video, but given how well the last one did and how long these series are going to take me to make, I didn't want to leave my channel with no new content for an entire month. Besides, my next video isn't even FNAF related, so I wanted to make this one and appease the algorithm first. In the pipeline, I have a theory for Danganronpa, and then I plan to talk about the transition period, and then I'll just figure it all out from there. In the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you haven't subscribed, go do that so you know when the videos come out. The bigger my numbers get, the more motivated I am to pump stuff out. Anyway, you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.